Welcome to the Women Leaders Association Daily Member Podcast, where we believe we go further, faster, and have more fun when we go together. I'm your host, Julianne Kirkland. And in each Daily Member Podcast, we will pick out a great speaker from one of our meetings that we thought you would enjoy. You can access hundreds of recent speakers, book summaries, great articles, and more at no additional charge through your membership portal. If you would like to get involved in a Women Leaders Association mastermind group or find a networking group near you, or if you just need access to the membership portal, simply go to womenleaderspodcast.com to be connected. Now let's tune in for this incredible message.
I am Patricia Partelow, or my friends call me Patty. I am based in New York and I work for Ernst & Young, or EY as we say it, and I'm one of the leaders in EY's payments practice, so within financial services. But the reason why I'm here talking to you about this topic today is in my career, I've worked for some amazing companies such as PepsiCo and American Express and IBM and now EY. And one of the big focuses that all of these companies had was really around talent development and diversity and inclusion. And when I say diversity, I think of diversity of thought and making sure that, you have the best and the brightest with diverse perspectives, at all levels within the organization. And so sponsorship, when I was at Amex, was one area that we really focused on. We did some research with Harvard Business Review and published the sponsorship effect, and it became a white paper, and it continues to be a key topic. So one thing that I would say is I feel like sponsorship is easy to say, but it's actually hard to do. But like I said, I think it's key to really making the most of your career and getting the progression that you need. So if we can flip to the agenda slide, please. So, hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll be able to talk about why we're talking about sponsorship to begin with, really put some definition around it. I know we throw out terms like sponsors, but we also talk about advocates and mentors, and I think of them slightly differently, so we'll share that with you. We can talk about how do you really get a sponsor and, the best ways to go about it. And then what does it really look like when you have one and it's working? So, when you think about everything that's been happening within corporate America, right, there's been a lot of different situations that have really put more of a focus on sponsorship. A lot of companies, looked at, while a lot of companies had diversity and inclusion programs, what you would see is an inconsistent mix of male-female as you went up through the ranks. So as you can imagine, there was a lot more gender equality in the lower ranks, and sometimes even women would skew higher. But then as you moved up in the organization and you looked at more senior roles, especially getting towards the C-suite, you saw the percentage of women in those roles decline. And, there was a lot of focus on, well, why is that happening? At the same time, companies have gone through many different organizational structure changes. That's kind of normal. You evolve and you meet your competition where they are, and you hopefully surpass that. And with those org changes, I believe comes opportunity. There becomes new roles that are out there that you as a, mid or senior level leader might not even be aware that these jobs are being discussed and being approved within an organization. And at the same time, and it's funny, I was just on a panel last week at a women's conference talking about the Great Resignation. There's been a lot of turnover, especially in the last few years with COVID. there's always been, I think, a war on talent in corporate America. And you see folks moving from company to company and really using that as a way to, get to the next level or make that next jump. But also when you think about those senior leaders, the flip side also happens is, you're in an organization, you're building, your brand, you're building your advocacy for yourself. And then all of a sudden that senior person, is no longer there. And then you're like, okay, well, who knows me? Who's going to talk well about the work that I've done? Who's going to advocate for me? So a lot of these things have really put more focus on retention and advancement, right? With all the change that's happening, how do you retain your top talent? And one of the things that we feel is very very critical to that is the idea of having a sponsor and the effect of that sponsor on your career, because people stay in jobs when they're happy, right? And when they're progressing as they feel that they should. So having a sponsor can definitely affect that positively. So the other thing I would tell you too is, sponsorship is what I would call a critical business relationship. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we move forward. And then, the other data point I'll give you now that we'll come back to is that a vast majority of the CEOs within a company come from what I would call line positions, which would be line of business positions. And, what we have found is in the past, as women have moved up, a lot of them have shifted from these line positions, line of business, to more staff jobs, right? Or staff functions, that required more focused expertise. So, but for men, that wasn't necessarily the case. And if you think that a lot of CEO positions are being filled by those in line jobs, that one of the key things too is to make sure that women get those jobs. So I talked a little bit about this idea of cultivating relationships. That's a key thing. When you start in your job, the main reason why you're getting hired is because of your functional or technical expertise in your role, right? And with that functional expertise, comes your results, and you feel, and you think, okay, if I work really hard and I put my head down, I work really hard, I get the results, and great things will happen. And I think as you move up in your organization, the functional expertise that you have is almost like a given. Like you didn't get to where you are by not having that expertise, but where you need to go, or for where you want to go, if you aspire to keep moving up, it becomes less reliant on that functional expertise because all your peers have that. It's really more around the leadership that you demonstrate, your ability to influence and collaborate, and most importantly is what I think of as cultivating relationships. I think nowadays almost everybody works in an organization that's pretty heavily matrixed, and the way to get things done is through these three bullets, right? Leadership, influencing skills, and then building those relationships, and then cultivating them and keeping them going. And it's interesting because when I was at Amex, I had people that were super functionally, technically savvy, but as they worked on projects and they interfaced with people, if they didn't build that relationship coming out of that project or that interaction, it made it really hard for them. And part of the issue is they didn't focus on that. It made it really hard when they were looking for their next role. And when I talk about relationships, it's not necessarily just giving people what they want. And sometimes when you're in a matrix organization, there's going to be tension, and there's going to be, what I call constructive conflict. The thing is to come out of that project with building of a relationship, and part of that is building trust. So for me, relationships and cultivating relationships is about reliability, doing what you said you're going to do, showing up when you said you're going to show up, and then really building trust with others. And it's even said that the ability to cultivate relationships is a demonstration of leadership potential. So it's important, and something that needs to happen. Now, it's interesting too, because, years ago, a lot of companies tried to institute formal sponsorship programs, and they tried to assign people to senior leaders. And, there was a lot of pushback on that, because, let's say I'm a leader in the organization and I get assigned someone. If I don't know them, or I don't think that they're ready, it's going to be really hard for me to advocate. So it's going to be hard to advocate for them. And so it's not something I think you could turn on or off. It is that relationship that evolves from like this lesser to greater trust and public commitment. And I saw someone asked about, sponsor versus mentor. We're definitely going to get to that. Great question though. So, when I think about sponsorship, again, those are, the critical relationships that can impact your career, right? So, who you build your relationships with, and those that you cultivate for sponsorship purposes, I think you have to be strategic about it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have lots of advocates, but I think, a sponsor is someone that's really, gonna put their credibility on the line for you. You're gonna earn that relationship, through trust, through performance, right? And it is different from mentors and coaches, which I think can either be assigned or can be, asked for. And the thing that I would say is, and I've had people that I've sponsored, the smart ones get that it's a two-way street, right? And that, you need to continue to build that relationship and build goodwill in that relationship, and think about, what can I do for that person who's really, doing, everything they can for me. And so, if you have a great sponsor, think about, how can you help them? What can you do for them? Because that's another thing that really benefits them, and it keeps the relationship going. And then, when I talk about sponsor effect, really it's that impact of having that person, looking out for you, talking about you when you're not in the room. I talked earlier about, there's a lot of jobs that, get created that don't get posted. And by the time they're posted, yes, they're going to be publicly posted because they, good companies do that, but they've already have maybe 2 or 3 people that have been referred for that job. And so, or maybe it's that project, right? Like this critical project, someone's sitting at the table and saying, hey, we should think about having, Ginger do that project because, I've seen the work that she's done. She's done some really great work, and I know she would knock it out of the park. And if you don't have a sponsor, I would almost sit back and say, okay, do you have a sponsor in your organization? And if you do, that's great. If you don't, my second question would be, do you feel that your career is progressing at the rate in which you had hoped? And really, I think it's that second piece that if you don't have one, you might feel a little exposed or a little bit out there, or, not having that air cover or person really out there advocating for you. And so, what we've found in the past is that it really helps people to love their job and where they are, right? And if you think about women, and, you can cut the diversity factor by a bunch of different ways or elements or attributes. Like, to me, it's that someone is focused on you, and you want that person to feel comfortable, you want them to feel that they're learning, you want them to feel like they're advancing, and that will really determine whether or not they stay. And I think, as I was saying earlier, I think often that's an issue if you don't have the person kind of helping to pull you along. It's going to take longer. Maybe you feel that you're not getting the credit that you deserve, or you're being passed over for some really impactful projects. And then, maybe that next recruiter that calls, you're more apt to take that call. So, we've seen sponsors have, a great positive effect when they're in place, and, can drive dissatisfaction if they're not in place. And like I said earlier, I think this really comes more into play, at the mid-management and upper management levels. And so, as I was saying, like a sponsor, there's mentors, there's advocates, and there's sponsors. And to me, this is my definition. And it's really, if you look at it from a left to right perspective, basically, your mentor and is someone that, can provide guidance. It can be, internal to your organization. It could be external. It's usually someone that's either been assigned if you participate in a formal mentorship program, or it's, it's someone that's, requested. You may say to someone, hey, do you have the opportunity to coach me on some things? Usually they're time bound, meaning you don't have to keep them forever. They're sometimes even situational, but they're really there to provide guidance as needed. And, I do participate in a few different mentorship programs, and I usually leave it to the mentee to really drive what we talk about and how I can help them, with their careers. Though sometimes I come out and ask, some basic questions as well to make sure that they're thinking through certain things in their career. The second level is what I would call advocates. And basically, those are people that really, they think highly of you. They know what you can do. You've earned it typically, the advocacy that they're giving you. And they can be like a peer. They could even be a subordinate. Maybe it's just people that really love working for you. And if you have followership, that's often the case, right? When you want to build your A team, those are the people that you've collected over time that really will support you. Or it could be a superior. And basically they speak on your behalf, and they speak well about you on your behalf. And often it will very much align to like what you're interested in, where you are in the organization, and what you're tasked to do. Where the sponsor, to me, that's the ultimate goal from a relationship perspective. They're typically a couple of levels above you, right? Because they need to be able to see things that you don't have access to, right? It's those, jobs or projects that are being discussed when you're not in the room. Now, I put in here that it's a powerful alliance. I use those terms purposefully, and because, like I said earlier, you have to continue to kind of grow that relationship and tend to it, right? Feed it and weed it and take care of it. And so it's two ways. Often, like, you may have worked with that person, or they might be a leader in your chain of command. It could be in a different part of the company that's seen your work, and they know that you can do well at a variety of different things. They often will use their connections for your benefit. Now, it's interesting because if anybody ever looks at my LinkedIn, they're always like, okay, so you spent a ton of time at Pepsi, right? A consumer products good company, and then you went to Amex, and like, how did you do that? That's a big jump. And honestly, my sponsor from Pepsi actually went to Amex, and he kept trying to get me to go there, and I was like not really sure that I needed to go anywhere. And then ultimately he put a job in front of me, not him personally, but someone in his organization, and it was a great opportunity. But I got to Amex, and people were like, well, and I was at a VP level, and they didn't typically normal from outside, and people really just like, scratch their head when they'd be sitting in a room with me, and I'm, leading this really strategic group. And, what basically happened was both my boss and my sponsor, they kind of they put their credibility on the table and brought me to the table, so that people would at least listen to me. And then it was up to me to kind of, to kind of go beyond that and really establish my brand. But I feel like I could not have been successful there if, these two individuals didn't, give me their credibility, which I think is key. And the other thing that sponsors often do is they kind of push you a little bit. The good ones do anyway. They push you a little bit into areas that you think, wow, can I really do this? And they have that confidence, knowing what your potential is, knowing the performance you've done before, whether or not that's something that you can do. And as women, it's been often said that when we look at a job description, we think about the 20% that we might not have covered in our prior roles, versus the 80% that you could do with your eyes closed, where men don't seem to really let that kind of hold them back. And so, often a sponsor is there to kind of be your your advocate, but also kind of help you to have that confidence that, yes, I can do this. And so basically, when I think about a sponsor, they're really there to kind of help you move along, go to the next level, and the like. And it's funny because when I was saying that, I came to Amex because of my sponsor, when he left Pepsi, he said to me, I think you're done here. I think you've learned everything you need to learn. You should think about a different role. And it wasn't until I got to Amex that I realized that he was right. That, while finding my next role, it was like, okay, what do I need to learn? What, initially do I need to do? But those opportunities kept getting smaller and smaller. And when I went to Amex, it kind of inverted. And I was, for the first year or so drinking from the fire hose, but it was great. I was on a learning trajectory, which really helped me in my career. So I've hit on some of these points, but I wanted to pull them together onto like one, put them all in one place. Typically, your sponsor is within your company or your organization, right? Because they're going to have line of sight into those jobs and opportunities that you don't necessarily see. The one thing I would say, and I know today there's a lot of more entrepreneurs and startups, sometimes a sponsor in a startup situation could be just someone who's maybe been there, done that before, can help provide the right connections. So, the idea that it's within your company is probably more of a corporate view. They're definitely more senior in hierarchy. We typically would say at least 2 levels above, to really, have the ability to really influence your career in that way. And they have to be someone that's a credible voice within that company, right? Or within that industry, right? They need to, because if they're going to, bestow upon you their credibility and get you to the table or get you in that role, then they have to be credible. And sometimes I see that even with like mentors or advocates, that we either we don't go after this more senior enough person to give you really good advice, or they're not well respected in their organization. So maybe the advice and the influence that they're going to have isn't going to be as large as you would hope. The other thing is, and that's why you kind of go up a couple levels, is you want them to be decision makers. You want them to have that level of influence. My last bullet point here is, they're also going to be willing to give you a job when you really need one. So a decision maker in terms of, an influencer within the organization, but also a decision maker in that they can give you a job as when needed. They're going to be at the table, in talent discussions and reviews. They're going to be able to really influence decisions about your career. And as I was saying earlier, you can't really, at least I've found that you can't really turn this relationship on automatically or off. It's really something that you grow with intention. And you think about, who have I really demonstrated some great work? Who's at a level that can support me? How can I help them as well? And, as I was saying before, they're going to put their credibility on the table. They're going to take a risk on you. It's really someone that, believes in you. And like I said, sometimes they believe in you before you do, and it helps push you along. And, when you feel most uncomfortable is usually when you're growing, right? And so this person is there and they're on your side. And so it's really a critical relationship that you need to really kind of move along in a quicker way. And also, if you're moving into a new company, having a sponsor, some women have told me, like my first job I interviewed for, and every job after that, I was pulled into, and that's great. That means that, you have those people that are thinking of you when a job comes open. And yes, you might need to go through a formal interview process, but really you've got that inside referral, so to speak, and credibility, which helps a lot when you're moving into a new company, right? And people don't know you and you haven't had a chance yet to build your brand. So, okay, so if you can't turn it on, and, formal sponsorship programs in the past, have failed, like because, again, you can't almost force that. Well, how do you get a sponsor? As I was saying earlier, I think, the first thing is really demonstrating and demonstrating your potential and, your capabilities and delivering results. That's sort of the basis. No one's going to ever advocate or look to, put you in the game if they don't think you're going to succeed, right? Because it's their reputation as well. So I think that's the key. And then, the second part is, okay, well, how do I build and then grow that relationship with that key leader? And, some of it is, helping them on things that, you can help them with. I've had sponsors where, when you get to that point where you've built that trust, you can speak freely and, and honestly, and sometimes senior leaders want to hear the honest truth, right? Not not everyone in their leadership team is going to tell them either what's really going on or how that really went, right? And when you build that trust between you and your sponsor, sometimes you can be that voice for them. And, I've, had this situation where I've been able to do that. And, I never did it in public, obviously, but, I've told my sponsor, hey, I think that's a bad idea. And these are the reasons why. And here's the data points. And, and I found that they really appreciate that. But I've also been someone that they can rely on, in the last minute, they can ask me for something because they know that we have that relationship and we have that trust. And, I am going to go that extra mile for that person because, I got to keep putting, like I always say, money in the jar, right? So that later I can take it out. And then, this need for a sponsor or for sponsorship really intensifies as you grow in an organization, because as I was saying earlier, a lot of these more senior level jobs, they're not necessarily the ones that they're not going to be posted on day one, right? There's usually, in a lot of the companies that I've worked with, there's been a very strong talent management program, right, where they're not only thinking about succession plans within organizations, but they're looking at talent and deciding, okay, what next critical experiences does that person need? And having people, in those discussions that know what you can do really, really helps. And so, sometimes they're even just highlighting for other leaders in a talent discussion some of the great work that you've done, because maybe even your direct boss isn't in that room at that time. So, and I would always say, don't ever assume that people know all the great work that you're doing. Make sure at minimum your leader does, your direct manager leader does, but also there's nothing wrong with making that known more broadly. And I think how you do that is a whole topic of another conversation as well. And then the other thing I would say too is, this one benefactor or sponsor, you can't count on them for your whole career, right? As I was saying earlier in the beginning, and I saw that happen, when I was at Amex, is, you end up kind of getting pulled along. You're someone's protege, you're having a great career, and then all of a sudden they leave. Now, typically what happens is they reach back in and they're going to pull you along with them if they can, right? There's sometimes now restrictions around that, but, that can happen. But you may also decide to take a different course in your career, and maybe their expertise, they're not sitting in that part of you, in that industry with you, or in that organization with you. And so, I think always trying to build advocates that you can later go in and then build into sponsors if possible is always a good idea. And I would, people have told me, oh, I have like 3 sponsors. And I'm like, wow, if they're truly really 3 sponsors and they're doing that level of sponsorship, that's phenomenal. I've always felt like if you have 1, that's great. And that 1 is going to be relevant to where you are in your career. And then, coming up behind it, think of it almost like a pipeline, is you've got some additional advocates. Because like I said, sometimes, people move on. And then like I was saying earlier, the way that you keep that sponsor relationship is you continue to pay it back. You also, have FaceTime, but, think about how many times you're meeting with them and you're asking for something versus you're, asking for something for your benefit versus, you could be asking something for their benefit, right? So, try to, and it doesn't have to be 50-50, but try to really balance that out if you can. Okay, so when I think about, sponsorship, I think this is all pulling it together for me anyway, is this idea that, your sponsor believes in you, even when you don't believe in yourself, right? They offer the support that you need, right? Sometimes they'll even help you just think things through, but they'll also make connections for you. They'll provide access to people for you. Sometimes that access is so you can get your job done. I have to say, having a sponsor, I felt the pain of not having a sponsor in a company, because, with that sponsor, they can make a phone call, or they can really help, remove barriers that might take me 3 times as long. And, so I felt the positive and the negative of that. Obviously, they're going to, introduce you to people. They're going to tell you when you need to go get in front of someone, even when you don't feel comfortable. One of the things that I do terribly is network within like my company, right? I network a lot outside of companies, and I'm always thinking about how I can help somebody else. But within the company, to just get FaceTime with someone, people are busy if I don't have a purpose, but sometimes you just need to go and have that conversation. And, I've had my advocates and sponsors really push me to do that. And when they tell me to do it, then I feel a little better, because they know those people and they know that it would be well received. They're also going to, take risks for you, and they're going to, when people are debating if it's you or somebody else, they're gonna say, give it to her, and and with conviction. And I think that's really important. And then sometimes the courageous conversation is telling you the thing that other people don't want to tell you. But again, if you're building that trust and you're creating that open and honest dialogue, it goes both ways. And I've had those types of conversations, and it really is, easier to take from someone that who's telling you for your benefit, right? And it's got a constructive point to it. And then, as I said earlier, gives a vote of confidence about you to others. And, whether it was in, initial meetings when you're trying to build your brand, or, just as when they talk about you, and that a lot of these things ultimately create opportunity for you. And as I said before, it can provide air cover, especially when you're trying to do something that may go against, the norms of your company, right? But if you know that you have sort of that senior leader support, maybe not just from your boss's, chain of command, but also from others within your organization, it really does help. And on the sponsored talent side, or, protege, if you want, again, you're delivering results in your role. You work really hard for your sponsor. You see the value in that, and you want to pay it back to them. You want to make your sponsor look good. Sometimes I've had conversations about, well, yeah, this sounds like a really great role. Are you sure I can do it? Because I don't want to make you look bad, right? And so it's just the opposite of that, is you really want to make sure that you deliver for them, because they obviously put their credibility on the line. The other thing is, you communicate with your sponsor, however that works for you and that person, whether it's, meeting one-on-ones, whether it's emails, phone calls, whatever works. And it was funny. One of my sponsors, every once in a while, because I used to take the train from Manhattan, just north of the city, and, he lived in the same county as I did. So he would just offer me a ride home, and I'd have my list. But we would really, and it was great because I didn't have to worry about anybody being shocked at the honesty between us. But we would just, have those conversations. And then obviously you prioritize that relationship. You make time for it. You make time for not only the relationship, but also their requests. And then, what does that end up looking like? Well, basically, you end up with a relationship that's pretty heavy, right? It's a shared responsibility and accountability. So you don't take them lightly. And that might be another reason why it's hard to have more than one sponsor, because of the amount of effort that it takes, even for the protege. The other way I would describe these relationships is they're generous. I mean, I've had sponsors that have been very patient with me, teaching me, guiding me. I've learned probably more from exposure to that sponsor. But they're also generous not only with their patience, but their time, right? Because, everybody is super busy, and the fact that they're making time for you, you're also making time for them and helping them with things. And the other thing is, you're building goodwill through those actions. And then the other thing I would say is back to establishing trust is, it's an obligation, right? And, you got to continue to build that relationship, even beyond maybe that sponsor got you that great job. Well, don't write them off after that, right? Yes, of course, they're going to understand that you're probably going to be, really busy trying to learn your new role. But at the same time, there is that, when they ask for something, you're going to try to make the time for them. And then, it's, if it works really well, great things happen. So, for me, I think, when I think about sponsorship, you get that talent management and growth, right? That coaching, it will, or it should, I guess I can't say will, but in my experience, it has really, accelerated my career advancement. And maybe part of it was because I took roles that I saw the 20% of that I didn't do, but, I had someone who I felt really knew me telling me the 80% was more than enough. Having sponsors, especially for women, it does help, with retention and make people happy and engaged. And, if we can, it makes for a more inclusive leadership culture, as well as talent retention.
Hey, my friend, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to rate, review, and share your biggest takeaway. And if you're wanting more, you can access hundreds of recent speakers, book summaries, great articles, and more at no additional charge through your membership portal. You can also get involved in a Women Leaders Association mastermind group or a networking group near you. Or if you just need to access your membership portal, simply go to womenleaderspodcast.com to be connected. Because here at Women Leaders Association, we believe we go further, faster, and have more fun when we go together. That's all for today, my friends. Bye for now.